Our next talk is going to be with co-founder of Aleo Network Foundation and CEO of Provable, Mr. Howard Wu.
Thank you. Hi, guys. I'm Howard. First off, thank you for everyone for attending and for coming. I really appreciate just your attention, and also I'm very excited to be talking about this subject. I think it's a subject that hasn't been covered deeply in the industry, and something that I really want to talk a lot about today. The title of the talk is called Beyond the Blacklist, a compliant way to build, should be only one, two, but to build ZK finance. I'm Howard. I'm the founder of Aleo. Aleo is a new L1. We launched about 6 months ago. What makes Aleo interesting is it's the first ZK L1 to support private smart contracts. And I'm a strong believer in privacy. I've been in this space for, I think I've been in crypto for about 13, 14 years. I started doing research in the ZK space about 10 years ago. And we started building this protocol about 5.5 years ago. I think as we start to reach, now that we're at mainnet and we start to reach out to build applications, it's become very clear to us that compliance is intimately wedded with privacy. And this is an area that I think is going to be a huge opportunity for crypto. And I want to talk about how we're seeing it and the lens with which we see through it. So to really set the stage and really kind of frame things for everyone, in order for crypto to really embrace and adopt privacy technologies, I think it's very useful to look back 20 to 30 years ago at the early internet and think about how the internet came to be. Back in the day, HTTP was the primary protocol. This is how the web worked. Everything was in the clear. Everything was public. And one of the main opportunities that came about was encryption technologies. When TLS and when HTTPS became a standard, it enabled trust and it unlocked e-commerce for the web. And today, I think we take for granted that HTTPS is just commonplace. 98% of the internet is now HTTPS traffic. But that wasn't always the case. And if you look at our industry, we're in a very similar space right now. When you look at crypto and you look at just total stablecoin payments, it's a tiny dot that is encrypted payments right now. We are in such an early stage. And to put it into concrete numbers, last year, about $30 trillion worth of stablecoin payments were made. Less than 0.01% of that traffic itself was actually encrypted payments. And you may be wondering, well, why does this matter? Just to give you the context that I see it through, when I go to my local coffee shop and I buy a cup of coffee, if I were to pay with USDC, I don't want the barista to be able to know my wallet address, but they will. And the problem is they can instantly then see my wallet. They can see what tokens I have. They can also, if I were being paid in crypto, they could see how much I make. They could see how much I spend. They could see how frequently I spend. This is a huge UI UX problem. And I believe that this user journey, it fundamentally needs to be solved. So we see there's like two big problems here to address. And there's one solution that we'd like to propose. The first problem to really call out is just that fully transparent blockchains overexpose data, putting users at risk. And I think that this is something that people are starting to recognize. When you go on every chain, all the data is out there, all stablecoin payments are widely accessible, anyone can index it, anyone can see it, and this has its own limitations because of that. But the second problem is you can't just throw privacy on it and encryption on it and call it a done deal. Like, the problem with that is that you end up with solutions that lack compliance. And the important thing to call out is that compliance is not one size fits all. Every different jurisdiction has its own requirements, and every developer needs to adhere to their own local laws and regulations. And so, when it comes to developing a solution that is actually practical and pragmatic, not only for the developers, not only for the users, but also for the regulators and policymakers, you need to build a blockchain that gives you configurable compliance. And so this is where introducing compliance techniques becomes absolutely critical if you want this technology to actually reach mainstream adoption. And so we built Aleo. And Aleo itself is a blockchain that supports private smart contracts, but more importantly, it supports configurable compliance. And the way that we've framed this is to say that Aleo is the first chain that is permissionless, it is programmable, and it is privacy preserving. And it sits at this intersection of these three different distinct properties that we think are absolutely essential if you want to build decentralized applications that offer some concept of privacy for the end user and for the end application. And we're not alone. there are other chains that are out there who have tried this, but those are the chains that I'm describing that have basically added and bolted on encryption without really thinking through compliance. And so today I want to kind of start by explaining to you what the status quo looks like, and then describe to you what we think are some opportunities for developers to explore that will help to introduce better compliance into the space. So yeah, I think it goes without saying that the future of payments demands privacy and compliance. And today, this is one approach that people are looking at. Stablecoin issuers can use view keys to seamlessly achieve compliance. In the Aleo model, a private key derives itself into a view key, which derives itself into an address. And this scheme is a linear derivation path. We've been very intentional about designing it this way so that signing and visibility are two separate concepts. So for instance, if you are in a large enterprise or a large company and you have different teams, you may not want the team that is going to try to do forensics to be able to also have signing abilities. And so we've been very intentional about separating these things out from a security standpoint. And the view key itself gives you certain types of capabilities. The primary one is that it can decrypt transaction data. This provides specific compliance capabilities. Namely, you can then view specific transaction history. You can also view all transaction data. You can, for example, verify that a user has no transactions with OFAC sanctioned accounts. And it's also an access to transaction data. The access to transaction data can be gated if you want to threshold it. And so you can then, for example, offer a multi-party scheme or a threshold scheme to then gatekeep what parties can have access to that data. This is an approach that some in industry have recognized and have started to do, and we think we can do better. And so there are even further techniques that I want to introduce, and there's three that I'd like to talk about today. And this is the section of the talk that I kind of call compliant by design tooling. So what do I mean by that? Well, the first is really introducing policy engines. Compliance and rule engines are things that I think are absolutely critical. And if you look at where the industry is at today, the main challenge is that we haven't had smart contracts in privacy-preserving blockchains. This is the first blockchain to introduce that, and it's because we care deeply about compliance. And so Predicate, who's here actually in the audience, it is a perfect example of what the capabilities can look like. Introducing a policy engine can provide smart contracts with rules and rule sets that allow you to define what are allowed and what are not allowed in a system. And Predicate has been integrating with Veralink as part of that initiative, which is the bridge that allows us to move assets from Ethereum to Aleo today. And this is a wonderful example of what that can be. The goal is to give developers the ability to have a sandbox and a framework that they can work in, so that they can pick and choose based on local laws and regulations what they need in order to actually deem themselves compliant. And certainly there are plenty of advocacy groups as well as industry analytic firms. There's Chainalysis, there's TRM Labs. These are all folks that are currently also trying to understand what best practices can look like, and they're starting to help define that standard as well. But this is something that we think is going to be absolutely essential for privacy-preserving applications. They're going to need to think about this. They're going to need to build this into their systems in order to remain compliant. The second area is, of course, verifiable credentials. And verifiable credentials is an initiative that I think is very well suited for the ZK landscape. And you may wonder why. So to give you context here, what's powerful about ZK when it comes to identity is that I can prove to you that I'm over 18 without revealing to you my date of birth. I can convince you of my citizenship without revealing to you my nationality per se. I can then use that information and prove to you that I'm not on an OFAC sanction list without giving you all my personal details. And so verifiable credentials can be very powerful because it is a primitive that allows you to provide attestations about you and about properties about you without revealing to you all of your information. We have this initiative which is run by the foundation called zPass. zPass is an implementation of identity verification. I think that this is a great example of the kind of first iteration of what verifiable credentials will look like. In the US at least, several states are now exploring age verification when it comes to visiting certain websites. Several states have been passing legislation around this topic. I think it's become more and more topical, and I do believe that long term, you're going to start to see national ID cards and government-issued passports offer primitives in them that are not only going to be, DID friendly, but even ZK friendly for identity verification. The third area that I really want to talk about is escrow time loss. So this is something that I think is going to become increasingly essential. As you guys have seen, especially with bridges, this is an area where it's important to analyze traffic, because if you have a privacy-preserving blockchain, people are going to want to use it. And there are good and bad actors in this world. And the important thing is to keep the good actors in and the bad actors out. And time locks and escrows are an important mechanism for doing that. If you look at the existing privacy-preserving blockchains out there today, there are no policies in place to provide escrows and to provide time locks. And so this is something that I encourage developers to think very carefully about and to introduce as part of their configurable compliance policies. And the opportunity there is that then when transactions are, for example, going through a bridge from, say, an Ethereum or a Solana to a chain like Aleo, this gives you as the developer and third parties that you work with the opportunity to inspect those transactions or to certify those transactions under certain properties to make sure that those are authorized transactions before they get moved into a chain like Aleo. And I think that this is an important piece that people should really be thinking hard about, because frankly, I have not seen a chain actually do this at scale. And the last piece I want to mention, which is beyond just the compliance techniques, is that this is a conversation. Policy is always a conversation, and compliance and privacy have always been a talking point. We have, for instance, ARC 100, which is a governance proposal for bridges that is proposed by the community for the community on how to best enforce bridges and how to provide best practices for bridges. But there are also plenty of advocacy groups who are also in the audience today. There is, for example, the Blockchain Association, there's Coin Center, there's Crypto ISAC. These are all groups that are actively at the forefronts, not only talking to developers, but also talking to policymakers and regulators in their respective jurisdictions to try to advocate for privacy in the right manner. And I also would say that for developers who are building use cases that are privacy preserving, that it's important to engage these folks, to tell them about your use case, your user journey, why it matters, that privacy is important, and how you are thinking about compliance. It's also an opportunity to engage them to learn about how regulators are thinking about it, and what best practices could be for your application, especially as you evolve and iterate on your smart contracts. And so I encourage that side of the dialogue as well. But yeah, I think for developers who are also new to this room, I also want to call out that Aleo itself has taken a very strong position in being in the U.S. I'm a U.S. citizen. The founding team is U.S. citizens. We're mostly U.S. employees. The labs company is a U.S. registered company, and most importantly, our foundation is a U.S. registered foundation. And this was done during a time when it was not very popular to do that in the U.S. The reason that we did that is because, well, for one, we're all U.S. employees and U.S. citizens, and we work here and we launched from here. And so, we believe that it's important to stay true to heart. And because of that, we also launched with a U.S. partner, Coinbase. And as part of that, we are continuing to try to establish what best practices look like for this chain, and helping developers to build applications that are going to be compliant and confidential. We launched with Coinbase about 6 months ago. They are now running a validator on the network. They also provide staking for end users. They provide custody, and they provide listing support as well for the network. And actually just 2 days ago, we just announced a collaboration as well with Google, specifically with Google Cloud, to also develop compliant and confidential Web3 payment systems. And it's very clear to them that this is an open issue. In fact, I was just on stage with one of the members in the audience talking about that collaboration. And one of the things that was brought up during that conversation was the fact that Google has started to trial stablecoin payments as part of their Google Cloud system, and they've now done eight figures worth of traffic in USD. But it's become abundantly clear to them that this is an open issue, that privacy is an open issue. And for those in the audience who are kind of just getting into the payment space, the fundamental challenge for businesses is that you are leaking your business data. So you can take that information and figure out how much your revenues are, how much your earnings might be, and also if for those businesses that are trying to use stablecoins to do payroll, well, the problem is you're leaking to the general public and your team how much you're paying your team. And so your colleagues can just look up from the wall and see how much their colleagues are making, which is probably not what you want. And so this is what I say when I say that the user journey of money in crypto is broken. I think that there's an opportunity to change that, and a chain like Aleo is really purpose-built to support these types of use cases. And so yeah, Aleo unlocks the next generation of payments and commerce. And with that, I want to conclude. I think my time is up. If you're interested, please follow me. My Twitter handle, or I guess my X handle, is @1HowardWu. Yeah, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention.